Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the mornings. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Tuesday, October 14th, 2025. Time for another show. Time for another solo show. Yesterday was rough. We didn't have Greg Dworkin with us. You know, yet more work to be done at the regional headquarters in New England, but almost done. And I'm sure he's champing at the bit. Something's happening to his bit. Is what's happening now, and he's ready to get back on the air, I'm sure, as soon as tomorrow. So hopefully, fingers crossed, that works out, because I don't know, yesterday was a very trying show for some reason. I guess the solo shows are always a little bit difficult. There's no real breaks in the action of talking for me. You get a good rest when Greg's around and telling stories as well, and you can catch your breath, and that doesn't happen during the 2-hour marathons. But I'm used to it, used to doing them on Tuesdays, that's today, and Fridays. But they always do, right at the very end, I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm a little out of breath. We've just been talking solid for 2 hours with tiny little breaks here and there. But yeah, it's kind of taxing. And anyway, yesterday it was just more so than usual, I guess. And I don't know. Anyway, hopefully things go well today, because we're in for another solo show today. And what can I tell you? The news gathering task has become onerous at this point, and we have so much backed up to get to that I don't know. I'm not certain whether there's value in trying to forge ahead and stay connected with the day's happenings, or catch up with everything else so that the next couple days worth of happenings make somewhat more sense with more context. I'm sure it'll be a mix of both. It is the day after, I guess, the pronouncement of the big news of the week. Anyway, it should be the big news of the era, but no one's really sure whether it's going to stick. But yesterday's big triumph for the Trump administration was the announcement of the peace deal, and it even came with Time magazine that ran with, I got to go and look at it on the screen here, but ran with a big inspiring, I guess it was supposed to be, photo of him front page, and declaring, in fact, using that language, Trump's triumph, which people pointed out, like, with this framing and this hero-style photo, could it be any worse? Could it be any more Riefenstahl-less, even using triumph in the headline? But as it turns out, it made Trump very upset. I don't know whether it rose to the level of furious boiling over anger, or it was just like late-night simmering for him. But he didn't like the photo that they chose for him, which, who cares, right? And as others put it, where was it? I think Raw Story was covering it, and I like the headline that they gave to it. I'll see if I can find it. But basically, at a moment when the world's attention should be turning to implementing this supposed new, and that's one of the problems of it, is supposed new Mideast peace plans. He's instead up in the middle of the night complaining about how his hair looked in the photo that they chose, and that he didn't like the angle, right? Or here we go. Their post on it this morning. No sooner had the ink dried, and we don't know whether it really has. No sooner had the ink dried on Donald Trump's signing of a peace plan for the Middle East than, quote, concerns were raised that he will move on to some other subject that he feels requires his attention, and the whole framework will collapse. And that is a huge issue. But it was also the fact that the thing that he captured his attention to move on to, in a post from 2 hours ago, in the middle of his victory tour overseas, where he is touting his success at getting Israeli hostages released as part of the Gaza ceasefire, Donald Trump took time off to rage about how a recent magazine photograph captured his hair. They disappeared my hair, is what he's worried about here. They took a shot of him from underneath, which is never super flattering for, not going to be super flattering for him. not a lot of body types that kind of shot, of on the underside of the face is going to be super flattering for. But, he's a little jowly, so I don't think he was too happy about that. But also, the lighting was such that his very weirdly colored and weirdly coiffed hair, you could kind of see exactly how thin it was and how it's essentially a thin candy shell around the chocolate nougat center of his skull. And you could see that, it's hairsprayed in place, as a helmet over a gigantic, the guy's 79 years old. He's going to be balding at some point, right? Anyway, nothing for him really, honestly, to be worried about, but that's the kind of person he is. He'd be worried about that sort of thing. So now, I don't know. I'm not certain what he has in store for the magazine now that he's so mad at them. Maybe nothing. But the other post hints at the more serious problem, which is, look, the deal is now concluded, and Trump is a deals guy, so his attention will just turn elsewhere. And it looks like, what demands his attention at the moment is China. He's got to pay some attention to China, and he went to his toolbox on that. Something China did upset him, and so 100% tariffs. We're now back in 100% tariff territory. The situation is such that I guess the Chinese, I guess in retaliation, I guess that's the best way you could describe it. We're certainly in reaction to the U.S.'s new bizarre drop of a hat, whichever way the wind blows, tariff regime. They will match it by saying, all right, well, if you're going to put a tariff on our finished goods that we ship to the United States and cut us off that way, we will, utilize our control of the rare earths minerals market and just put export controls on them, very much the way the United States puts export controls on high-end computer chips. And guess what it is that China is actually after in this situation? High-end computer chips. So if you're going to use export controls to make it difficult for us here in China to get your high-end computer chips, we'll put export controls on the rare earth minerals and make it difficult for you to get what you need to build, among other things, those high-end computer chips. And so Trump has got himself back into the familiar territory of a trade war with China, from which we haven't really discussed it yet, and he's also already kind of tacoed out of it, which, fine, that's probably for the best. Maybe the best thing we have going for us is that Trump can be scared out of implementing these stupid tariff regimes. That's probably the best outcome. New York Times analysis of it presented, is it this morning's? Yesterday's publication, but who knows? Must have happened after yesterday's show. So that's a morning publication for our purposes. Trump's two minds on China. So a chaotic few days. That's an optimistic outlook. Both that it'll last only a few days, but that Trump has two minds, let alone just the one we've been worried about. Anyway, it's illustrated with a photo of his babbling to the press on board the aircraft. So, that's going to have some coherent statements being made to the press. I did notice this morning, just in the various, flotsam and jetsam of the news cycle, that Trump had a run-in with a Politico reporter. The run-in being they asked him a question, and I guess he didn't feel like answering it. And so now Politico is on the crap list, as it were. The word that they might use for that. If they use it, we can use it. If they don't use it, we can still use it, but we just don't. Anyway, he got angry with this Politico reporter. Oh, yeah, Politico, is that where you're from? He asked where she was from. And now, they're fake news. He can just label whatever he wants fake news. But I don't know. It was interesting. And people were pointing out this has, been a bit of a suck-up access reporter type person here. And look, none of it worked. All the sucking up is gone in an instant. As soon as the orange guy gets angry about something, you're fake news. We hate your guts. Get the hell out of here. I think she tried to bail herself out. The reason people were circulating audio of this exchange was allegedly she tried to bail herself out of the situation by saying Kayleigh McEnany. Kayleigh, was it Kayleigh McEnany that was going to vouch for her, or was it Caroline? Yeah, maybe it was Caroline Leavitt. Will vouch for me, which, who cares? But that's not really great credentials. And of course, the idea that Caroline Leavitt or any of the rest of them would say, oh, no, sir, you're wrong. I'm right about this person. Listen to me. No chance in that ever happening. If they intended to vouch for her and then found out that the boss was angry with her, they'd abandon her in a second. I don't know what that was supposed to be about. But now I'll have to get a note for myself about this Politico exchange and see if I can supply it to you if you haven't seen it already. Meanwhile, the China story I was going to bring you by Zolan Kano-Youngs, reporting from Washington for the New York Times. Just days ago, as it happens, President Trump indicated his trade war with China was entering a more belligerent phase. They're all belligerent, of course. China's new, quote, unheard of, unquote, controls on rare earth minerals were, more quotes, small quotes in this story, sinister and hostile, and a, quote, moral disgrace, he fumed. You should be doing this in his voice, but you can imagine it. Vowing to hit back with 100% tariffs on all products from China. And then a curious close to the comment. The rest is history, he said in a social media post. Of course, no, it isn't. And it can't be yet because it hasn't happened. It'll eventually be history, but that doesn't help anybody either. But that's a good quote. Maybe I should start using that. The rest will eventually be history. What else are you going to do today, sir? I'm not going to tell you, but it's going to be history because it has to be eventually. It isn't yet, but soon. Just 48 hours later, it's a short history. Just 48 hours later, Mr. Trump appeared eager to rewrite that history. President Xi Jinping of China was only having a bad moment, Mr. Trump said on social media on Sunday. Then, don't worry about China. It will all be fine. Yeah, why worry about that? He reassured his followers that the United States, quote, wants to help China, not hurt it, with 3 exclamation points. The dueling messages appeared to provide a window into an internal tug of war for Mr. Trump over the best way to approach China on trade issues. He has repeatedly seesawed between retaliation and reconciliation, rattling markets, sending businesses scrambling, and leaving questions about whether he has a larger strategy. He doesn't. He doesn't have any strategy per se, to the extent that you're tipping back and forth. It's just different crowds in his inner circle convincing him at different moments to do one thing or the other. And he's content to go along with it because he's also figured out that there are, if he just tells somebody what he's going to do at the moment, there's a market play that you can make for that, right? Today I'm angry at China. What are you going to do? 100% tariffs. All right, well, let me make the appropriate, futures bet on the market, and then you do the thing, and then the market will crash, or whatever, and I'll make a ton of money on the crash while everybody else loses. Or if it's the other way around, I'll do the other thing. I think the big rumor and circulation on social media over the last couple of days was that the big announcement of the tariff on China came just, hours after a gigantic cryptocurrency short bet that somebody made, several $100 million on in a matter of hours. Not really sure what the connection. I'm not that connected to international economics, finance, and Wall Street gambling. Why a tariff on China hurts the value of cryptocurrency, but apparently it did. So, I would have thought that cryptocurrency seems to think itself immune from just about everything, so that government regulation getting in the way and hurting the valuation of it seems counter to what I thought the whole thing was about. But thank God I don't invest a great deal of time or money in understanding cryptocurrency. I'm going to be left behind by the people who are stealing all the money, but that was going to happen anyway. All right, so the dueling messages appeared to provide a window into this internal tug of war to the extent it's internal to him at all. At times, Mr. Trump has taken steps to, quote, decouple the United States from China, threatening severe tariffs, moving to suspend sales of critical technology, and even revoking the visas of Chinese students. But with a potential meeting with Mr. Xi expected this month, Mr. Trump and his aides have also struck a conciliatory tone in hopes of reaching a trade agreement and cementing Mr. Trump's self-described role as a master deal maker. Oh, yeah. Both approaches were on display in recent days. Markets in the United States plunged on Friday amid Mr. Trump's threats, then rebounded some on Monday as he seemed to back off. And probably as his sons began to sell off the stocks they bought on the cheap after he told them that he was going to be announcing the retaliatory tariffs threat so that the market was going to plunge. And then they went out and, did their favorite move, buy the dip. And then, okay, well, I'm going to back off on that on Monday. So don't worry. You don't even have to hold this position for a long time to find out whether it was a good play. We'll make it a good play. Stocks in Asia, which had closed for the week before Mr. Trump's bellicose turn, fell on Monday amid fears of an intensified trade war. Mr. Trump most likely saw China's curbs on rare earth minerals, which tightened its grip over global manufacturing, as a personal slight. Sure, why not? He's the same color as many of these rare earth minerals, after all, particularly after the two sides agreed to defuse tensions and scale back tariffs in the spring, said Josh Lipsky, the senior director of the Atlantic Council Geoeconomics Center, a think tank, in case you hadn't figured that out. At the same time, the administration wants to keep a summit with Mr. Xi and a broader trade agreement on the table, particularly as American farmers begin to feel the trade war's toll. Mr. Trump raised the possibility on Friday of canceling the meeting, a threat his Treasury Secretary backpedaled on Monday. China has halted the purchases of American farm products such as, soybeans. I know you've heard this story. We haven't talked a great deal about the soybean situation, but you must have seen in the last couple of weeks what the situation is up to, and including the bailout of the right-wing government of Argentina, which then proceeded to, was already doing it anyway, has been selling its soybeans in bulk to China in the absence of their willingness to buy American soybeans. So not only did the American soybean farmers lose out to Argentine and other soybean farmers already, but we also sent $20 billion to their government to help underwrite that effort to undermine American farmers. So, he cares very much about you. Don't worry. Anyway, China has halted purchases of American farm products, as you know, such as soybeans, using U.S. growers to gain leverage in the talks. We know the pressure the administration's facing on that front, Mr. Lipsky said, so it's competing priorities, and at any given moment, one might win out. Just don't know which one. Craig Singleton, senior China fellow at the Nonpartisan Foundation for Defense of Democracies in Washington, but honestly, think about it. It's the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Is that really not? I mean, I know they thought it was nonpartisan because they figured everybody, both parties in this country, are in favor of the defense of democracies. Not so much anymore. And you might as well admit that you're partisan, except for the fact that probably most of the people working there think they're Republicans. Anyway, Craig Singleton said that Trump most likely had two different audiences in mind. And I can believe it whenever they say, like if you said he has two different strategies in mind, no. Two different audiences? Oh, audiences. That's something I think he can grasp. The initial threats were meant to show resolve and punish Beijing's overreach. The softer tone since is aimed at calming markets and reassuring allies, Mr. Singleton said. Trump and his team seem to believe Beijing miscalculated, and they're leaving room for Xi to walk it back without escalating further. White House officials did not respond to questions about what prompted Mr. Trump and his aides to change their tone over the weekend, and he probably threatened to throw out anybody who asked why the tone changed. Rare earth minerals are crucial for making an array of products, including motors, brakes, semiconductors, and fighter jets. That is an array, isn't it? China controls much of the world's supply, and the minerals have become one of the more pressing sticking points between U.S. and Chinese negotiators. China's new restrictions would require companies anywhere in the world to obtain licenses if they were exporting products containing even a minimal amount of Chinese-produced rare earth minerals, including for chip manufacturing. Those exports would also be controlled if the minerals were produced using Chinese mining, processing, or magnet-making technologies. Okay. Companies with any affiliation to foreign militaries would be denied licenses. The restrictions came after the Trump administration took steps to expand its global technology restrictions, and Chinese officials have accused the administration of undermining progress between the two nations. Well, that they have been doing. On Sunday, the Chinese Commerce Ministry pointed to the U.S. Commerce Department's expansion of the companies subject to sanctions when included on a government entity list, a move that would affect many Chinese and Russian firms. Pretty clear to me that China does not put out the new rare earth restrictions in the absence of the commerce rule, Mr. Lipsky said. We had what I would call a kind of temporary truce between the sides over the summer, where neither side wanted to escalate in advance of the two leaders meeting. That was pretty clear on all sides, and the commerce rule was seen by the Chinese as a violation of that, just as what China did on rare earths was seen as by the U.S. as a violation. Treasury Secretary Scott, whatever that guy's last name is, Bessent, tried to calm markets on Monday, saying on the Fox Business Network that Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi could work out their differences before the November 1st deadline that Mr. Trump set for his 100% tariffs. And also, close watchers, distant watchers, casual watch, blindfolded people could probably tell, well, you understand what's going to happen here, right? Let's say that Mr. Trump and Mr. Xi cannot work out their differences before the November 1st deadline. One, remember that the November 1st deadline is one that Mr. Trump set for his 100% tariffs, and he could taco, he could punt, he could move the deadline. He could say that it was never a deadline. We already know this play. So, if he can't calm the markets this way, you can calm them. I guess you could calm the markets by saying, don't worry, we'll move the deadline. Or, I guess look out for the possibility that they're not interested yet in calming the markets. They haven't done enough betting against the markets to clean up on the eventual calming they'll get when he moves the deadline. So basically, you should be watching their investment strategies for a hint about what the policy will be, except you're not allowed to see their investment strategies because they are, investing privately and not sharing that information with you. Yes, that's insider trading. We should tell the SEC, except who's the SEC? The unitary executive is. So go F yourself. You know how that works. Mr. Bessent, I love that pronunciation of it, said the Trump administration was working to find a way to stabilize the finances of farmers. And you know how he does that. He sends them money. Whose money? Yours. The Chinese have unfortunately turned our soybean farmers into pawns. Really? They did that? Mr. Bessent said. They're trying to manipulate them, and our farmers overwhelmingly back President Trump, even though, that's who did this to them. Vice President J.D. Vance also appeared to leave a door open to a deal with China during an appearance on Fox News on Sunday. Vance reiterated that Trump appreciated the friendship he had developed with Mr. Xi, the beautiful chocolate cake friendship. But he also warned China not to, quote, respond in an aggressive manner. I guarantee you the President of the United States has far more cards than the People's Republic of China, Mr. Vance said. Whether the administration will have the same leverage in the months to come is uncertain. Mr. Vance noted that the Supreme Court was scheduled to hear arguments over the administration's use of emergency authorities to impose tariffs. Unless we have access to this tariff authority, it's going to be very hard to negotiate with China, Mr. Vance said, and I guess a warning to the 6 conservative justices on the Supreme Court. You need to defend our right to arbitrarily raise taxes on the American people in order for us to fight China somehow. And don't you love higher taxes? I thought all Republicans did. No, we've always been at war. So anyway, that's a fun thing to note. On the international peace agreement front, there are a few entries, just cautionary words, I guess you could say. Some more cautionary than others and some more deferential to the administration than others, but it's always wise to keep an eye out on it. Aswin Subsang had this to say. Good reminder, I think. We sort of fallen into this habit, and it's hard not to. It's ingrained in the American press and therefore in the American people that, a 40 5 prior presidential administrations were relatively trustworthy about such things. They were perhaps untrustworthy on the whole, but generally speaking, when they said they had completed a high-stakes, high-focus international agreement on matters of life and death, war and peace, they meant it. This administration doesn't mean anything ever that it says it's all for, it was really all for social media content and getting a headline in the traditional press. Always an interest of theirs, always an interest of the old man's, of course, because he's very traditional press oriented. But he also knows that if you get that headline, then you share it on social media. And that just kind of cements things. And people's attention span is such that, yesterday, all the headlines said peace in the Middle East. So that's that. But we are reminded, as I said, as Aswin Subsang says, we have been here before. And you should be warned, essentially. We've been here before. It wasn't even a year ago that the second Trump era began with him declaring how good at making peace he was, only for that to predictably not happen at all. And then he helped actually escalate the war in Gaza. So, it's a good point. He was reacting, in fact, to Nicholas Grossman, who often makes good points himself, and we share him here on the show from time to time. I'm stretching it out until we get to, the music. So I can tell you what Nicholas Grossman said that Aswin Subsang was commenting on. The many media outlets, politicians, and commentators who rushed to declare, quote, a great peace, glory to the king, should ask themselves why they did that and figure out how not to make the same mistake again. I think they thought they were on solid ground. A peace thingy happened yesterday, so they covered the news of that. Whether it lasts, that's not news, but later it'll be history. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And some breaking news. I don't know. I'm not certain how breaking it is. When people put breaking in their comment, I at this point I consider it to be ironic, but I think he's probably pretty earnest in saying it's breaking. Don't know whether that necessarily means it's breaking or whether it means it's true. But Brian Tyler Cohen says, breaking: President Obama comes out in favor of Prop 50 in California. California, he notes afterwards, help protect democracy and return your ballots today. What's Prop 50? That's, I think, the seal of approval from the voters that they're hoping to get on the ballot initiative to do California's own mid-decade redistricting in an effort to tamp down on the effectiveness or even erase the effectiveness of Republican efforts to do the same elsewhere, and to do the same, but to do it first. So a retaliatory measure, not usually in the Obama toolkit. You know, he usually goes high, right? When others go low. Good. what can I tell you? I'm glad that he's doing it. That's fantastic. He's a lot bolder, on subjects like that. Somebody else's political agenda and things that could be done, rather small, relatively small bore, I guess, versus the full plate you usually have when you're president. He was a very cautious president, which is good. You should be very cautious as president. And I know we wish that he had been more bold and outspoken, but he had a lot on his plate. Anyway, he does much better with these sorts of things now that he's out of the presidency and he's not gambling away, his own administration. So good, fine, fantastic. It's to be expected. We'll take it. I don't know if anybody was waiting for that. I don't know if anybody really doubted that it was coming through. But, it was a different time when he was president. And, of course, he was playing a different game. And, while trying to push him to say, maybe we should push the filibuster out of the way for you to get this Affordable Care Act thing across the finish line in a more palatable form, he instead said, well, we'll take it in a less palatable form, but eventually everyone will get used to it and want it, and it'll become popular. And lo and behold, that has happened. And even murdery Trader Green looking to save the subsidies for it at this point in time. So not a bad play per se. We were just impatient and wished that he had been more outspoken on hardball tactics like this. And now he is. So good news for all of us. So I've let it scroll away. And so I should move back and try and find that thing so that I can show you exactly what I was looking at the time when it came by. But you know how these things are. Once the scroll has moved on, it becomes almost impossible to find the thing again. All right, I got it. Where were we? Before the break, we were in the middle of God only knows what. Oh, right. We were warning ourselves not to get too excited necessarily about it's hard to say this, right? Don't get too excited about the prospects of Middle East peace. I mean, I guess we've been there enough times that we know it should be watched carefully. Nothing's ever permanent there. No one ever knows. But and on top of all this, this is apparently a Trump negotiated, we're meant to believe that this is a Trump negotiated situation. And, they're usually not very good. So anyway, ample warnings coming from all corners. Let's share some of them. I know the play, I guess, is supposed to be you should be being optimistic about this stuff. Hostages, they're back. That's good. I mean, that's a major accomplishment. Although others were pointing out, if you're comparing something like, other metrics like the number of hostages that have been released by the negotiations of the various presidents of the United States, apparently, stands to reason. When there were more of them, the Biden administration negotiated the release of many more of them. Where there were fewer of them still being held or still alive at this point, there were fewer on the table, I guess, and President Trump negotiated the release of far fewer of them. 20 or so yesterday, allegedly 127 or so, something. I think that's the number that sticks in my mind from having seen the graphic of it, to Biden's credit. And as we mentioned yesterday, a lot of discussion about where did the substance, such as it is, of any peace plan that was agreed to yesterday really come from? Was it really Trump's thinking? Was it really Trump's administration's thinking? Very unlikely. More likely that it was basically cribbed from the Biden administration's work on these things, although there weren't a lot of people willing to give the Biden administration any credit for it, because the agreement never stuck. No, and there were several ceasefires negotiated, right? But they never stuck. And all right, so there's not a great deal of credit, I guess, available for things like this. Also, I guess I'll point this out. This wouldn't be the first time that the Trump administration had inherited a fully developed, well thought out plan, or what looks, what passes on paper as a well thought out plan. I don't know. I don't know how to evaluate these things. Handed over to it for a major international crisis, and the Trump administration says, ew, gross, it was written by Democrats, throw it out, to the detriment of all. I'm thinking actually about the pandemic response plans the first time around. But given what they did with that, I guess you should count yourself lucky that this time they didn't say, ew, gross, a peace plan for the Middle East, throw it out. They made it worse, and they said, let's use this peace plan to build a casino and hotel in Gaza. Yeah, okay. I mean, not okay. But you knew what they were going to do with this sort of thing. Anyway, I guess it's just I'm wondering whether there's anything to be said about them saying, well, let's take what there is that's usable. We'll make it worse, but at least we should, instead of saying let's not use any of this, like they did with the pandemic response plan. Maybe it's the best you can hope for from a Trump administration. Anyway, we were reading about how Nicholas Grossman was saying the rush to say that this is a superb achievement for all time for the Trump administration, probably a mistake. But again, it comes from the understanding of the American press that presidents mean what they say and will do the work to stand by it and secure their legacy. And that's not necessarily applicable to the Trump administration. Plus, it's about the Middle East, which, you're never really likely to get anywhere with predicting how that's going to go. And, even there you might say, well, previous administrations have been able to nail down agreements with Israel and others in the Middle East. But again, it was sometimes, at least, historically speaking, different regimes in Israel. The Netanyahu government, not the same as prior administrations in Israel or elsewhere for that matter. And that's going to be, bad news for making positive developments stick, just generally. And I know that there are a lot of people who say, no, Israel has always been like this. And maybe yes, maybe no. We'll leave that debate for another day. But I will say, I mean, the Netanyahu's been in charge or near in charge of the Israeli government for far longer than any other prime minister of Israel by far. And, it's a relatively young nation. So a fairly significant chunk of Israel's history has been under the Netanyahu influence. And many, grown adults have known no other Israeli government. I mean, internationally, like that's just what Israel has been to them during their lifetimes. And they don't really have any experience with any different kind of Israel. And, so, they have come to the conclusion that Israel always does this, that, or the other thing. And it's easier to come to that conclusion if you're Palestinian and living there, certainly. But internationally, I don't know that everybody always agreed. But now they've kind of come, I think, to experience Israel over the last 30 years as this belligerent, and reluctant party to peace agreements who doesn't feel bound by them. So you have a situation like this, as Nicholas Grossman points out, hey, maybe it was dumb to jump to conclusions given, one, that the Trump administration was involved, but also you should note for the record, well, you report factually about what's happening. Peace has, now I thought they declared peace in the Middle East, as they said in Clueless, and Carl Quintanilla forced to, tell the truth about what happened in the last couple of days, noting that ABC News has reported that the IDF said its troops opened fire on Palestinians, killing 5, but only after they allegedly violated the terms of the ceasefire agreement. So, what can I tell you? It's probably the case in almost all war zones. Like, I guess I would have bet against it, if at the end of any of the prior wars that were conducted, in the old school fashion, right? Even historically outstanding moments, the way World War I was conducted, they actually declare truce and like count down on their clocks and then say, boom, that's it. Like, I don't know. I ask you, would you have been the first one over the top of the trench and walking out in no man's land because it was 11 o'clock? Or would you have proceeded with greater caution? Similarly, I guess in these later days, if you thought like, oh, it's safe to go out for a stroll in Gaza now that there's a ceasefire. And I mean, after all, the president of the United States and the prime minister of Israel and many countries got together in Egypt for a big conference to congratulate themselves on this thing. Is it safe to go walking in front of Israeli troops in Gaza? No, it's not. That's not your fault for being dumb. That's just that's just war, and in particular war with the modern Israeli state. Okay. So there you go. Israel Defense Forces have already had at that point already killed 5 people. Why? Well, they were violating the ceasefire agreement. Were they? I don't know. Probably not. Who knows? I don't know whether. You know what? I don't know whether it's probable that they weren't. I don't even know why I say that. Maybe yes, maybe no. It's a dangerous game. Ceasefire agreements in Gaza. I'm glad they have one. Stay in your shelter, everybody. IDF as well. Anyway, so there you go. And it's not the only such instance. And there's already discussion of the Israeli government saying, well, actually the peace plan's terms say we can continue military activity in the bulk of Gaza for various reasons. Some of which is, disguised in the language of, well, if there's going to be a ceasefire, they can't have. We've always been interested in destroying the tunnels under Gaza that we say Hamas is using to launch these attacks. Yeah, right. I mean, to the extent, and I know that there's debate about whether or not they even exist, and I didn't really want to get into that debate. But I mean, obviously, I would think, well, if you want to have peace conditions that approximate, if not peace, then a ceasefire, you would think that would be on the table. And it would make a certain amount of sense. Where they're discovered, you would want to be able to clear them out and destroy them. But, the Israeli version of discovering them may turn out to be, well, we know where they would be if they were real, Gaza. So, bombs, that will take care of it. Is that really a ceasefire? Not what most people think of as a ceasefire. That's true. Anyway, to move on to more organized and I think more learned and understandable thoughts about this, because my own uninformed general feelings about wars, I don't know, they tend to be hard to finish and hard to end. And what I've learned casually through, the observation of history, either through documentary or even historical fiction. But, it has to have some basis in order for it to ring true. One of the more dangerous periods of a war is the end of it. The ends of wars are super dangerous. And ceasefires apply to certain parties, but not necessarily always everyone. The Israeli government, if they were honoring the ceasefire faithfully, as most people understand it, would certainly say, all right, well, we can account for our guns not going off. Hamas presumably can do the same, but, angry individuals under their umbrella, can we be sure those guns don't go off? No. There's just no way. Can't happen. Can't account for everybody. Sometimes it's a mistake. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a mistake to leave that person under your umbrella, knowing that they are volatile and could go off at some point. That applies across the board. All right. Other thinking about it here in the New Republic, Michael Tomasky takes this subject up. Be glad the hostages are home. And I think we can all do that. And I think we did. Not long enough before we start worrying about other things, but as he says, be glad the hostages are home. Be worried about the rest. Yes, there is reason to hope for peace in Palestine. There is also reason to remain on guard, he writes. And I guess here are the reasons. I happened to be on the floor at last year's Democratic Convention when John Polin, P-O-L-I-N, and Rachel Goldberg, the parents of Israeli-American hostage Hirsch Goldberg Polin, spoke about their ordeal. There were press reports that they were a little nervous about the reception they were going to receive, given the hostile sentiment towards Benjamin Netanyahu's war in Gaza among rank-and-file Democrats. Valid worry, right? Some on the right were saying they were going to be booed or at best greeted with indifference. But that's the mission of the right, to say such things about the left. At conventions, journalists get floor passes for brief periods of time. You can't choose when you'll be so close to the action. So it was just an accident that I happened to be there at that time. As for their reception, well, you could have heard a pin drop. I studied the faces of the delegates. Everyone I saw was paying rapt attention. I noted Representative Steve Cohen of Tennessee, whom I know a bit, sitting at the head of his state's delegation. I went over and said hello. He knew the Poland Goldbergs well, had met with them many times, and told me what remarkable people they were. Hirsch, who was taken at gunpoint on October 7th, 2023 at the Nova Music Festival, is not among the 20 hostages who finally went home today. His parents spoke in Chicago on August 21st. 10 days later, the Israeli military announced that he and 5 others had been killed by Hamas. How do we think about a day like today? Yesterday, really, but the first reaction is one that should transcend partisan politics. Everyone should be glad that the hostages have been freed. Partisan politics was not visible on the faces of those Democratic convention goers that night in last August. They were focused, rightly, on 2 grieving parents. So, in other words, basically all of the operatives of the right who said otherwise and predicted otherwise, flat wrong, and you should never listen to them about anything. But that actually, in case you didn't guess, was not really part of the article, but subtext. Maybe not for him, but for me. Anyway, they were focused, as he says, rightly on 2 grieving parents. My friends and sometimes TNR contributor Joanne Mort travels to Israel frequently and has told me, as one can also glean from media reports, that the hostages' faces have been everywhere, and every Israeli knows their stories intimately. On a simple human level, this is a day to be celebrated. I'll add a thought on behalf of the hundreds of Palestinians freed today as well. Many of these people were rounded up in broad sweeps and still are. As he notes, his language says many of these people are rounded up in broad sweeps and either held without specific charges or tried by military-style tribunals where they aren't accorded the usual rights enjoyed by civil defendants. That's a lot of grieving families too. The second reaction is to hope, however we feel about Netanyahu and Donald Trump, that this peace process succeeds. Makes some of us uneasy, but yeah, I mean, generally the sentiment, yes. Do I hope a peace process succeeds? Yes, sure, of course. Why wouldn't you? You know, that's separate from who happens to be in power when it takes hold. I still want to believe a 2-state solution could be possible, he writes. That will require different Israeli leadership. Netanyahu has made clear for many years that he doesn't believe in peace with the Palestinians. As Israeli analyst and former diplomat Alon Pinkas wrote at TNR last week, there's a strong chance Netanyahu will bide his time and find an occasion to blow this peace deal up. By the way, it should be noted, there is a good chance that Netanyahu will not bide his time and blow the peace deal up. His speech yesterday, in the Knesset wasn't about peace at all. It was a victory lap. According to MSNBC's David Noriega yesterday, Netanyahu's speech was broadcast briefly on the large video screens above Tel Aviv's Hostage Square. He was booed. The screens returned to testimonials from the hostage families. Better viewing, I think, for them. And it will obviously require different Palestinian leadership. If Hamas is as decimated as Israel says, they're out of the way for now. And that's great for the Palestinian people, whose true interests Hamas has never served, to put it mildly. The Palestinian Authority is corrupt and compromised and desperately needs new leadership. We should all be hoping that somehow or other these things happen and this process stays on track. The third reaction is tougher to think about than the first two, as it requires us to entertain the possibility that the Trump-Netanyahu worldview got it right this time. Did it? Well, the hostages are home and a peace process is underway, and these, as noted, are great things, but only time will really tell. Even now, as Trump and Netanyahu bask in the glow of what they tout as unqualified success, we must never concede, for example, that 60,000 civilian deaths were necessary here, and those Gazans still alive are returning to find their homes gone, along with schools and hospitals. The UN report estimates that it'll take 10 years just to clear Gaza's rubble, and another 15 to make its farmland arable again. And that has a lot to do with, I guess, the areas that the Israeli Defense Forces are still occupying in Gaza as a safety buffer. Apparently, it's been pointed out. I don't know whether it happens to be true, but it seems to make some sense given, where the agricultural land is, but the most of Gaza's usable agricultural land is included in the perimeter of the permissible occupation zone. It's out on the perimeters of Gaza, on the edges away from the cities, which, that's, if there's going to be IDF occupation of a buffer zone, well, that's where a buffer zone is going to be. But yeah, it may also pose a problem for agriculture. But I think Gaza's agriculture, as they point out here, is probably, dead for the time being anyway. I don't know if it's going to hasten its recovery to have it be occupied by the IDF, but I don't know if it's going to set it back any either. Anyway, how can normal life take hold in such a place? That's a good question. In addition, rubble clearing itself is a deeply political act because it requires contracts. Who's going to get them, and how much are they going to be paid? Okay, interesting. You might think that was a petty question, but he points out the Times of London speculates that the Bin Laden family is likely to get a piece of the action. Okay, don't tell Laura Loomer, I guess. Wink. I'm willing to give Trump this much, says Michael Tomasky. At a couple of crucial points, he did lay down the law on Netanyahu in a way most U.S. presidents don't. In a way, let's face it, that Joe Biden probably wouldn't have done. It's also true that Netanyahu never would have given Biden or any Democrat the satisfaction of presiding over a deal like this. So the traffic on that street of mistrust runs both ways. And believe me, I've seen nothing so often in the past 24 hours about this situation, nothing so frequently repeated on social media as the charge that this was essentially a long drawn out October surprise. The Iran playbook transferred to Israel. Biden may have gotten the framework of an agreement in place, but Trump and Netanyahu reportedly spoke, and reportedly were relatively open with the fact that they had spoken during the campaign and said, yeah, don't give this. You cannot move forward with this deal under the Biden administration. Wait for a Trump administration to be elected, and you'll get a much better deal, and I might even let you prosecute the war for another 8-9 months before I force you into a peace deal anyway. And lo and behold, that is what happened. Still, writing in Haaretz today, editor Aluf Ben notes that Trump drew a line for Netanyahu on some crucial matters. When Netanyahu wanted to try to topple the Iranian regime last summer, Trump said no. He also made him recognize the new regime in Syria. And finally, as been widely noted, after Israel bombed Qatar, Trump had had enough and had also gotten a free airplane from them. Ben writes, attacking a country that bought him his presidential plane, and which hosts the largest American base in the Middle East, exceeded the limits of the freedom of action Washington afforded Israel, and at that moment, the countdown began to the ceasefire imposed on Netanyahu. Whether or not he's taking it seriously is another question. Naturally, he's still the Donald Trump who is destroying democracy and ruining lives here in America. Regardless of what happens abroad, we have an obligation to oppose his autocracy tooth and nail. That opposition, in fact, stems from the same humanitarian and democratic impulse that fuels our hopes for Middle East peace. The hope here is not naive, but rather a cold-eyed one. Maybe the Middle East and the world will see a more benign Trump than his own country sees. That is, it may be that he's willing to cut transactional deals with Israelis and Arabs in a way he's obviously not with Democrats and liberals and American universities. But usually people revert to who they are. We shall see. All right. So I don't know. I thought that probably should go on the record along with, as I mentioned, I don't know whether I parked any of the posts that people were passing around about the October surprise type machinations, but there's no shortage of social media discussion of those things. But maybe I'll again note to self about trying to find some of them for you just to save you time later in the day if you're trying to look those things up and find them yourself. All right. Other things that are I guess, still need to be woven into the post-peace deal analysis. There's a bit I have here that throws open the doors to some of the rest of our recent history, some of which has been forgotten along the way, but I know we're coming up against the break. Rachel Maddow pointing out something that was of some interest. If you were, we'll save the answer for afterwards, but if you were wondering about the setting of yesterday's late afternoon peace accord developments, that is the meeting in Egypt, or was that Sunday? It was probably Sunday. And how Trump was, co-chairing this event of some sort with the Egyptian president. And by the way, some very weird photo op content emerging from that, including was it Trump meeting with heads of state from the area, and one of the Gulf states, and I don't know whether it was the head of state of Qatar, who I don't think I would recognize by sight, or perhaps UAE. I'm not certain which, unfortunately, and I should probably go and look it up. But it met with one of the other Arab royal heads of state from the Gulf region, and did the grip and grin handshake photo opportunity with the guy, and basically manhandled them in all the ways that you're not supposed to in international relations, like the chief alpha deal guy thing, to grasp the hand, squeeze the hand, and yank the arm and throw the other guy off balance. And he's physically bigger than this other head of state. And then, of course, blabbing to the cameras, this guy's got a lot of cash, unlimited cash. He's got very rich. Anyway, he's a great guy. Thanks for coming, whatever your name is. That's what came out of Egypt. So if you're wondering why was Egypt on the agenda at all, the overseas travel, I'm sure they must have been dealing with everybody behind the scenes because they border Gaza, but it just really didn't seem like Egypt was taking a major role in this. Why did they host this major international event? Well, Rachel Maddow has some looks back into the recent history of Trump and Egypt that might help explain it, but you got to put the pieces together in your head. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. So, okay, I saw that there were people putting the pieces together, and Rachel Maddow had a moment, and I think I since we called his name out before, Aswin Subsang also likely was, I think it was, saying, oh yeah, I guess maybe I had the same problem. I forgot this incident as well, so I'm glad this is being brought up, and I'll tell you what that incident is in just a moment, but I first will remind you that I had mentioned to you this supposed throwback to the old October surprise playbook. And one of the pieces in support of that, I mentioned to you that they were not necessarily hiding it, at least not all that well, way back when. Ron Filipkowski posting an old Twitter post of his from August of last year, August 20th, 24. It is video from one of the, I guess, the talk shows. Can I tell which one it is? PBS. But PBS News Vote 2024, but I don't know which show it was. But anyway, the clip here, and I wish I was better with faces. Can't remember which analyst it is we're talking about here, but this bit here says, on U.S. peace negotiations between Israel and Gaza, quote, the reporting is that former President Trump, and we're talking about this is August of 2024 when he was former President Trump. The reporting is that former President Trump is on the phone with the PM of Israel, urging him not to cut a deal right now because it's believed that would help the Harris campaign. Like, it was right out there, and everybody was seeing it. It's supplemented with a post of a shot of taken 3 weeks earlier than that comment of a photo of Donald Trump gripping and grinning in a meeting with Netanyahu, which should not have taken place given who he was at the time out of power and a candidate for the presidency. But you know how Netanyahu plays things. He doesn't care who the president is at any given time. He cares about whether or not he thinks he can get Trump in the presidency again and have a free hand to do whatever he wants until he no longer does. Anyway, so I mentioned to you, though, that we wanted to read this other item from the recent past that, except where did we put it? That's the next question. The Rachel Maddow observation, which was just her posting, oh, right, what was this thing? Why? I neglected to put aside the context in which she says, oh, right. But as I said, I think it was Aswan Subsang saying, oh, yeah, I had forgotten about this too. And this helps, provide a piece of the puzzle. Why was Egypt so in focus? Why were they hosting this event yesterday? And there could be plenty of other reasons. It didn't make any particular sense. You weren't going to host it in Gaza. There was no place you could put it. You could have done it in Israel, but again, there, I guess it would have been in poor taste having, spent the previous couple of hours basically having a giant Trump rally in Israel. I don't know that the rest of the world would have come for such an event in Israel, and they may have insisted that it be elsewhere. And one of the most convenient places outside of Israel would have been, a neighboring country. Egypt, they border Gaza, so maybe that made some sense that way. Could it have been Jordan? Yeah, absolutely. Could it have been somewhere in the Arabian Peninsula? It doesn't border Israel, but or not directly. Saudi Arabia, I guess, does technically. But anyway, Egypt was the chosen spot. Why? And now speculation begins. Oh, right, says Rachel Maddow, including a link to a Washington Post story that helps explain it, but also some context here. What is Rachel Maddow reacting to? An Aaron Rupar post of some video from the event in Egypt in which Trump says, well, can I play it? I mean, I guess I could do the thing where I turn up the sound. Hopefully this is being an official event. I can get some quality sound out of the laptop because I didn't transfer it to the big computer. Shall we just play it? Let's see if he says things clearly here.
And then, of course, we have the host tonight, and I just want to thank you very much. It was a reason.
I would say that's pretty muddy audio, actually. And so I'll just read you the quote that Aaron Rupar pulls out. There was a reason we chose Egypt. So this is Trump describing the reason. So he won't be telling you the actual reason. But, the subtext is there. There was a reason we chose Egypt because you were very helpful. Everybody wanted to have this. You were a great leader. You have very little crime. Egypt. Very little crime in Egypt. I want to thank you. He's been my friend right from the beginning during the campaign against crooked Hillary Clinton. Have you heard of her? I mean, he's campaigning from 10 years ago, and he's doing it in Egypt. I mean, and by the way, were you to criticize anything about the trip, the Republicans would have reminded you, when the president is overseas, criticism stops at the shore. He's campaigning against crooked Hillary Clinton in Egypt right now. So that opens the door, right? What do you mean? Have you heard of crooked Hillary Clinton? How does that even come up? You were helpful right from the beginning in my campaign. Oh, yeah, basically, says Rachel Maddow, including a link to this story from just over a year ago, but also from the same time period as we were just reading about, August of 2024, when we were reading, hey, actually, the reason that no deal is going forward is that Netanyahu's been meeting with Trump, and Trump said, don't do any deal now because it'll just help the Harris campaign. What else was in the news at the time? August 2nd, 2024, an exclusive from the Washington Post. So maybe that's why people forgot about it. If you weren't reading the Washington Post that day, you didn't get the news because it was exclusive. $10 million cash withdrawal drove secret probe into whether Trump took money from Egypt. But then again, everyone was taking money from Egypt, weren't they? I mean, come on. And blah, blah, blah. I remember at the time that we were reading about this, I think we must have read this exclusive. Or, it didn't stay exclusive for long. But I remember thinking, who owns that townhouse that Steve Bannon lives in and was running Breitbart News out of again? Wasn't it a politician from Egypt? Egypt. That's my own echo. Yeah, it was. Any connection between the two? I don't know. Probably not. But any connection to the fact that Bob Menendez, who was then convicted of taking bribes, happened to have taken some of them allegedly from Egypt? I don't know. Neither do they, but they write about it in the Washington Post. $10 million cash withdrawal drove secret probe into whether Trump took money from Egypt. And guess what happened to that probe? Same thing that happened to the Homan probe. Anyway, political appointees rejected efforts to search for additional evidence investigators believed might provide answers because they might have provided answers. So stop doing that and then close the case. So this reporting is from August of 2024, but it covers events that took place several years prior. So follow the timeline, if you will. Aaron C. Davis and Carol D. Leonig, they were into the middle initials at the time, 5 days before Donald Trump became president in January 2017. It took me a while to understand the time shift here because this was a 2024 article, but this is 5 days before Trump becomes president the first time. A manager at a bank branch in Cairo received an unusual letter from an organization linked to the Egyptian intelligence service. It asked the bank to, quote, kindly withdraw, sure, why not, nearly $10 million from the organization's account, all in cash. That does seem unusual on its face, but wait till you find out what happens to it. It's unusual even without it going to Donald Trump. Inside the state-run National Bank of Egypt, employees were soon busy placing bundles of $100 bills into 2 large bags, according to records from the bank. If you're wondering, if you've ever kind of been curious, $10 million, what is that like? How much money is that? Suppose you did it in $100 bills. What would that take? Like, can I carry that? Can you put that in a briefcase? Because sometimes in the movies, they'll say that's $10 million in cash. Open the briefcase. Ah, yes, that looks like $10 million. Does it? Probably not. Why? Because it takes at least 2 large bags of bundles of hundreds to make $10 million. 4 men arrived and carried away the bags, which U.S. officials later described in sealed court filings as weighing a combined 200 pounds, good to know, and containing what was then a sizable share of Egypt's reserve of U.S. currency. So, that probably wasn't a normal procedure for lots of reasons. Federal investigators learned of the withdrawal, which has not been previously reported, early in 2019. So apparently we only learned about this in 2024. And it's difficult for me to remember when I found out about it because I do remember hearing about this withdrawal and the circumstances of it. And the circumstances that I remember are described in this article. But are we saying we did? It's hard for me to remember whether I only first learned. I guess I must have only first learned that in 2024. But investigators learned about it in 2019, during the Trump presidency. So where is that going to go? Nowhere. The discovery intensified a secret criminal investigation that had begun 2 years earlier, with classified U.S. intelligence indicating that Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi sought to give Trump $10 million. Why? To boost his 2016 presidential campaign, a Washington Post investigation has found. Since receiving the intelligence about Sisi, the Justice Department had been examining whether money moved from Cairo to Trump. Trump's not a city, he's a person. From Cairo, a city, to Trump, a person. Potentially violating federal law, that bans U.S. candidates from taking foreign funds. Investigators had also sought to learn if money from Sisi might have factored into Trump's decision in the final days, this is what I remember, in the final days of his run in 2016, to inject his campaign with $10 million of his own money. And I do remember thinking, yeah, that is a little bit unusual. He kept saying at the beginning, well, I'm going to have a campaign that's going to be clean. You can't bribe me because I'm going to use my own money because I'm so rich. But that contrasts with the Trump ethos, which is I'd never use your own money for anything. But at the last minute in his campaign, it needed $10 million somehow for some reason, and he allegedly invested it in his campaign himself. But, what's the sort of thing that would make him do so? The guarantee that, well, I'll send you $10 million to replace the $10 million you put into it. Well, those questions, at least in the view of several investigators on the case, would never be answered, the Post found. Within months of learning of the withdrawal, prosecutors and FBI agents were blocked by top Justice Department officials from obtaining bank records they believed might hold critical evidence, according to interviews with people familiar with the case, as well as documents and contemporaneous notes of the investigation. We need a discharge petition on that investigation as well. I mean, why would anybody suspect that the Trump administration would manipulate the Department of Justice into hiding evidence of its complicity in major international crime? That's just stupid. The case ground to a halt by the fall of 2019 as Trump's then Attorney General, the good guy, William P. Barr, right? Didn't he eventually fall out of favor and decide that Trump was maybe kind of a scumbag and leave? Oh, yeah. Well, only after, engineering everything that has made today possible. But anyhow, Trump's then Attorney General William Barr raised doubts about whether there was sufficient evidence to continue the probe of Trump. No, I'm not talking about the DOJ's professional prosecutors making the determination about whether or not there was sufficient evidence to continue with a case against James Comey, or sufficient evidence to continue with a case against Lisa Cook, or sufficient evidence to continue with a case against Letitia James or Adam Schiff, because that's totally different. There isn't, but let's go ahead. Oh, there isn't sufficient evidence here, or we can claim there isn't sufficient evidence. On one side, if you're prosecuting a Democrat and there's not sufficient evidence, or we say there is not sufficient evidence, who cares? Go forward. If you're prosecuting a Republican or looking to, and there's not sufficient evidence, well, nothing we can do. That's the way the cookie crumbles. Even if there was sufficient evidence, we can make the determination that there is not. And you have to give deference to us. Remember that? The behind-the-scenes drama played out during an especially tense time for the Justice Department. Yeah, you could describe it that way. With Trump accusing the agency of pursuing a politically biased witch hunt against him in its probe of Russian election interference, his appointees seeking to rein in investigators they saw as partisan, and some career supervisors growing wary of plunging the agency into yet another legal battle with the president. Barr directed Jesse Liu, remember him, the Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in D.C., back in the olden days, to personally examine the classified intelligence to evaluate if further investigation was warranted. Barr later instructed FBI Director Christopher Wray to impose, quote, adult supervision on FBI agents that Barr described as hell-bent on pursuing Trump's records, according to people familiar with the exchange. It is unclear what, if any, actions Wray, who was also appointed by Trump, took in response. But it doesn't matter because Wray is on the outs now because he said, what? He didn't even say anything bad about Trump. He just said, no, the election of 2020 was fairly conducted and Biden won. So there you go. And he wants to prosecute him, too. Even though Wray ran interference that allowed Trump to escape prosecution right here in front of everybody. That's weird. Anyway, something loyalty, very important to Trump. In June of 2020, the prosecutor Barr appointed to take over the office leading the case closed the probe, citing, quote, a lack of sufficient evidence to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt, unquote, back when those things mattered. That conclusion belied the months of internal disagreements over whether investigators had been allowed to go far enough in seeking that evidence. Every American should be concerned about how this case ended, said one of the people who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss internal dissension. The Justice Department is supposed to follow evidence wherever it leads. It does so all the time, or it used to determine if a crime occurred or not. A spokesman for Trump's presidential campaign did not answer a list of questions from the Post. Remember, this was 2024. Instead referring to this story as textbook fake news. Who does that sound like? Well, we had some questions asked in private just yesterday about where this person went to. The investigation referenced found no wrongdoing and was closed, spokesman Stephen Chung said by email. There he is, at least in 2024. None of the allegations or insinuations being reported on have any basis in fact. They did. The Washington Post has consistently played for suckers by deep state Trump haters and bad faith actors peddling hoaxes and shams. An Egyptian government spokesperson it's Egypt, as a spokesman, declined to answer detailed questions sent by the Post. It is inappropriate to comment or refer to rulings issued by the judiciary system or procedures and reports taken by justice departments in any other countries, wrote Ayman Walash, the director of the Egyptian government's Foreign Press Center. In his email, Walash also emphasized that the Justice Department had closed the investigation without charges. And so there you go. Obviously, the Americans wouldn't do that unless it were true. As he campaigns to return to the White House last year, Trump has cast himself as a victim of deep state plots that sought to undermine his presidency, often focusing his ire on the Russia probe that shadowed much of his time in office. That investigation did not ultimately find that Trump or his campaign had conspired with Moscow, but it did conclude his team expected the campaign would benefit from Russian interference. Unbeknownst to the public, during the same period, Justice Department officials were investigating whether Trump had received help from the government of another foreign country, Egypt. And only because I played the dramatic music before, every time I mention Egypt, I do it again. In the years since the Egypt case was closed, I won't play it this time, the Sisi regime's ambitions to influence senior U.S. government officials have been laid bare by the bribery conviction of Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey, the former chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Yes, you forgot that was Egypt, did you? Over the course of his presidency, Trump shifted U.S. policy in ways that benefited the Egyptian leader, a man he once called, quote, my favorite dictator. He almost got killed by Putin for that. In 2018, Trump's State Department released $195 million in military aid that the United States had been withholding over human rights abuses, a move that had been opposed by his first Secretary of State, who then said he was an effing idiot. But anyway, followed by the release of $1.2 billion more in such assistance. Why, almost 10 times the amount of money came out the spigot after that. The Justice Department and the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. declined to answer detailed questions for this report. The FBI declined to answer the Post's questions or to make Wray available for comment. Barr also declined to answer detailed questions for this report, and Liu did not respond to a similar inquiry. But let me just point out again the absurdity of something related but slightly different. It is 2024. It is the closing days of the Biden administration, 4 years since he wrested control from Donald Trump. And again, the reference here is we need comment from the FBI. Who should we ask? Well, how about the director of the FBI? We'll go all the way to the top. Who's the director of the FBI? Christopher Wray. How does what? Yeah, the Trump appointee to run the FBI that the Biden administration doesn't get rid of because tradition. Here in the United States, why bipartisan? He hasn't done anything on our watch that would warrant this. Yes, he was appointed by Trump. Yes, he was appointed by Trump in exchange for closing down the investigation into A, Russia, and B, Egypt. And there was plenty of evidence that there was real criminality with respect to A, Russia, and B, Egypt. And probably innumerable other places as well. But what the hell? We soldiered on through normalcy with Christopher Wray at the head of the FBI. And he didn't do anything particularly egregious, I don't think, during the Biden administration, which is, I guess, is why they thought, well, why create controversy when everything seems to be going okay? Anyway, plus he's now said the 2020 election went fair and square, so that's good. But just interesting because, now, of course, in the second Trump administration, the idea that people who keep their heads down and do their work in nonpartisan fashion can survive throughout the term of years to which they've been appointed for the job, legally speaking, without Trump's interference and insistence that he can fire him at the drop of a hat. Yeah, a bygone era. Anyway, maybe it wasn't a good choice, but just kind of pointing that out along the way. Back to the written material here. In an interview, Michael Sherwin, the then acting U.S. attorney who closed the case and a veteran prosecutor of complicated national security cases, said he had previously closed Oh, I see. I've got to read that sentence over again. So Sherwin, then the acting U.S. attorney, the one who closed the case, and himself a veteran prosecutor of complicated national security cases, said he had previously closed some, I'll add, such cases, where sufficient evidence never materialized. I made the same decision here, and I stand by it, Sherwin said. He just, look, the material I'm looking for is not going to I can't find it. Now, he may have been prevented from finding it, but this is his claim. Look, I've had to do this before. This exclusive account of the Egypt investigation is based on a review of thousands of pages of government records, including sealed court filings and exhibits. The Post also interviewed more than 24 people with knowledge of the investigation. The individuals spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss a sensitive probe that ended without criminal charges. Some showed the Post emails, texts, and other documents corroborating their accounts. The investigation was shrouded in secrecy for the entirety of the more than 3 years the case was open, from 2017 to 2020. It surfaced obliquely in that time only once, when senior judges closed a part of the federal courthouse in D.C. to hide the identities of the parties in a hearing then described as involving a state-owned foreign corporation that was resisting a subpoena. Many observers assumed the corporation was Russian. I think we all did. And we read about that. We read Marcy's coverage of it. We read everybody's coverage of it and tried to decipher who it might be. I don't recall whether anybody got closer to pinning it on Egypt at the time, but maybe. We should look back at that. In the final weeks of the 2020 presidential race, after the investigation had been closed, CNN revealed that the mysterious courthouse hearing involved an Egyptian bank. The network also reported that Special Counsel Robert S. Mueller III had led the case, which centered on an informant's tip that money had flowed through the bank to help fund Trump's campaign. CNN also reported that in the end stages of the probe, some prosecutors proposed subpoenaing Trump's financial records before top officials ultimately concluded that the case had reached a dead end. At the time, Trump spokesman Jason Miller, that's a guy who I think is missing from the scene, and we should be glad about that, rejected the allegation of money flowing to the campaign, saying President Trump has never received a penny from Egypt. But just the other day, he sat in Egypt telling Egypt's president what a great friend he was and thank you for your help against crooked Hillary Clinton. So curious, isn't it? The Post investigation reveals that investigators identified a cash withdrawal in Cairo of, it wasn't $10 million, it was $9,998,000. I guess a $2,000 service fee was charged. Nearly identical to the amount described in the intelligence, as well as the amount Trump had given his campaign weeks earlier. A key theory investigators pursued based on intelligence and international money transfers. That is to say, based both on intelligence and hard evidence obtained from banking records, was that Trump was willing to provide the funds to his campaign in October of 2016 because he expected to be repaid by Sisi, according to people familiar with the probe. That is something, isn't it? Why, that's very dramatic. In pursuing the Egyptian intelligence and other lines of investigation, Mueller's team looked more deeply into Trump's finances than has been previously reported. The Post found that investigators obtained bank records for some of the accounts Trump used most frequently when he was a candidate for office, and that debate inside the Justice Department centered on whether investigators could obtain additional records extending into the time Trump was president. No, total immunity, of course. Where some career investigators saw evidence that justified digging deeper, Barr and Liu expressed doubts. Trump's attorney general did not order the case closed, according to multiple people with knowledge of the events, but his instructions to Liu and later his selections to replace her helped steer it to that end. Interesting, and probably worth of continuing into the last segment, the music, which will lead us to the break, which will lead us to the last segment, now chiming in. There's more. It's a long article, but I guess it's probably worth spending our time on. If we're going to fall out of the day-to-day news cycle, this is probably something worth falling out for. Next up is a section called Team 10. We'll find out a little bit more about why, for instance, one official called what they found out jaw-dropping. We'll give you a chance to pick up your jaw and be right back.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Were you on the edge of your seat? Did you pick up your jaw? I know there's a lot more news happening out there, and lots of little bits that I wanted to share with you. We'll see whether half an hour is enough to wrap up the rest of this thing. I don't know. This seems like a good throwback, the sort of thing that a podcast is made for, even though at the moment we're not a podcast yet. Later in the afternoon we'll be a podcast. Right now we're a live stream. Yay. Totally different. Anyway, I introduced you, or I left you at the introduction of the next section called Team 10, and I'm wondering whether is Team 10 named after the $10 million they were pursuing the origins of, or is it something else? Let's find out. Team 10 section begins. One official called it jaw-dropping. Don't know what yet. In early 2017, Justice Department officials were briefed on initial reports from the Central Intelligence Agency that Sisi had sought to send money to Trump. That would be jaw-dropping. One, because they were like, well, I thought Russia was sending the money to Trump. And two, because anybody sending money to Trump is jaw-dropping. Well, really, honestly, anybody. Says he's a multi-billionaire. Why are you sending him money at all? And then two, foreign countries are doing it, and golly gee, he hasn't been even elected the first time, and already the stupid pledge that I'm incorruptible because I'm rich. Well, obviously that was going to be, that was a pretty stupid thing for anybody to believe. Thank God we didn't believe it the first time. Anyway, what's going on here? The intelligence that they're talking about that was so jaw-dropping had come partly from a confidential informant who had previously provided useful information, according to people familiar with the matter. Intelligence the CIA gathered in other operations corroborated parts of this individual's account. The Post learned. Justice officials sent the case to Mueller, who had been appointed in May to investigate alleged links between Trump's campaign and Russia, based on the theory that the Egypt allegations dovetailed with possible foreign election interference. And I get that. That makes some sense. You don't want to start all over again or have dueling special prosecutors, and you're never going to get that second special prosecutor at this stage of the game. He was already touch and go with whether or not Trump was going to go ahead and fire Mueller. Amazing just how, I don't know, how pure and naive Trump was way back then. And just, I mean, imagine now telling him, no, you can't fire him. The optics of that are terrible. Like, I don't think that lasts 10 seconds these days. Anyway, so there you go. More evidence for the emboldened Trump theory, but I don't think anybody needs any more proof of that. So, federal election law, of course, bans foreign nationals and governments, in case you were wondering, not just individuals, from making contributions or donations or providing any other direct or indirect financial support to candidates for political office in the United States. Mueller organizes investigators into teams with intentionally bland code names. And bland, yes, but not misleading. Just, obvious and dumb, I think, was probably as good a descriptor. Like, for instance, who was investigating the Russia angle? Team R. Okay, well, it saves keystrokes. The team investigating Egypt was dubbed, now it could have been Team E, true, but they just went with Team 10, as in $10 million, just what we were thinking. People familiar with the investigation said. That's not his job, to come up with creative names. By the early summer of 2017, prosecutors and FBI agents began sizing up the sensitive intelligence, taking stock of publicly available information, and pursuing other leads. They noticed that on September 19th, 2016, less than 2 months before Election Day, as we still called it then candidate Trump had met with Sisi on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York. By the way, everybody also circulating video of a sideline meeting between Trump and the president of, was it Indonesia, who was spotted talking with Trump and, garbled audio. But apparently I didn't hear it. I listened to the audio. I didn't make out what they were saying. But the claim was that he was asking about getting a meeting maybe with Don Jr. or Eric, which, that can't be government business. They're not involved in the government at all, or whatever. I'll see if we can't find that video clip for you out there somewhere. I'm sure it came from Aaron Rupar, who, by the way, we're getting to the point where, it's like unethical to keep relying on Aaron Rupar for his video clip production without supporting his effort over at Public Notice. So maybe you want to keep that in mind too, as somebody else to help keep afloat these days. So where were we besides doing fundraising for other people instead of myself? The campaign's account of the closed-door meeting at the sidelines of the UN General Assembly gave no indication that Trump had held the Egyptian leader at arm's length, as U.S. officials typically had done since Sisi seized power in a military coup 3 years earlier and swept aside the country's first democratically elected president. So presidents and politicians were in the habit of doing that. But also, by the way, you should be holding the guy at arm's length because you're not president yet. You shouldn't be engaging in foreign policy. You could meet foreign leaders in a run-up to a race for the presidency, but you're not supposed to be trying to transact any business with them. After the meeting, the campaign said Trump had told Sisi the United States would be a loyal friend to Egypt if he was elected president. And on Fox News, Trump praised him as a fantastic guy. So that isn't arm's length from a suspected dictator, no. Investigators also viewed it as potentially meaningful that, after he assumed office, Trump quickly embraced Sisi, the people said. Breaking with U.S. policy under President Barack Obama, Trump invited the Egyptian leader to be one of the first of his guests at the White House and met with him again, among other Arab leaders, on his first trip abroad. And then, some years later, the peace deal press conference essentially is held in Egypt, and no one knows why. Except for Trump, who's saying, remember your help when you helped me defeat crooked Hillary Clinton? Oops, what am I saying? As the Mueller team got going, investigators focused on how, at the time, candidate Trump met with Sisi in 2016. Trump's campaign had been running low on funds. They learned through interviews with the candidate's closest advisors that they had pleaded with Trump to write a check to his campaign for a final blitz of television ads. Trump repeatedly declined. I'm not using my money. Where can I find $10 million of somebody else's money? And he repeatedly declined until October 28th, roughly 5 weeks after the meeting with Sisi, when he announced the $10 million infusion. In the context of the Egyptian intelligence, investigators considered the amount a point of interest. People familiar with the probe said, though the infusion was recorded in campaign finance reports as a contribution, Trump's campaign finance chairman had structured the transaction as a loan. Why wouldn't you put that in the FEC filing? I mean, it's legit to put a loan in there, but no, they lied on the official forms, which something, blah, 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 mortgage financing, fraud, yada. Anyway, though the infusion was recorded in campaign finance reports as a contribution, they had in fact structured it as a loan that could be repaid to Trump to persuade him to approve the deal, according to FBI interview notes of a key Trump advisor. Team 10 began looking for signs of the alleged transfer of the same amount, searching for evidence of the money either leaving Egypt or arriving with Trump. And I could see where at the time they might say, well, what are the odds that we're really going to be able to detect this? I mean, if they have any effing brains whatsoever, they'll do just the minimum necessary to hide. It'll come in pieces. It'll come partially from Egypt, partially from Switzerland, partially from Panama, partially from Cayman Islands, in bits and pieces. And if they're really smart, I mean, $10 million is a lot to do in $9,999 increments. And of course, banking regulators are kind of used to looking for 99999, in the transactions, because it's supposed to escape notice if it's under 10,000. There are a lot of things that you could have done. So they probably didn't expect to just see like, oh, there's $10 million direct from Egypt. But that's what they found. Isn't that strange? By early 2018, according to previously unreported documents, again, how come it's unreported? Well, the Trump, unitary executive prevented it from getting out for 4 years. We're always finding these things out after the fact. By early 2018, according to previously unreported documents reviewed by the Post, investigators have obtained records from a handful of Trump's most heavily used bank accounts and analyzed large transfers between May and September of 2016 from before the Trump CC meeting in New York until after Trump wired money to his campaign. It was a narrower window of time than investigators wanted to scrutinize, according to people familiar with the internal discussions, but Mueller generally insisted on keeping the investigation as narrow as possible and not veering into Trump's finances after he became president. So, probably a mistake. We understand his motives for it. He's operating from a different time, basically, and under different understandings of presidential power, not unlike Merrick Garland in a lot of ways, without getting into whether or not he deserves any blame for that. Ask Marcy before you reach your conclusions on that one. But yeah, okay, so very narrow, very traditional, very Republican way of looking at this thing, but it's supposed to have made, remember though, this is the interesting part, all of this extra caution was supposed to have rendered his investigation and its conclusions unassailable. So how did that work out? Yeah, well, there's no such thing as unassailable in Trump world, for one thing. And yeah, so your narrow scope and caution bought you nothing except made it impossible to keep anyone's attention on some very interesting and specific intelligence and evidence that was developed that basically would have established all you would have needed really at that point, except for the fact that everything's been stood on its head. Like, would you have been able to get anywhere with the Russia probe if you were also saying the Russia probe is just one aspect of a wide range of overarching international criminality by Donald Trump? If you can't get your mind wrapped around the Russia thing, well, what if I told you that it was one of 10 countries doing this stuff? Would you then say there was enough smoke to declare that there was a fire? Maybe not. William Barr would still say, it's just a bunch of smoke. Each one of these smokes is individually dismissible, or at least I can close the investigation into them. Yes, maybe. But anyway, yeah, what did all of Mueller's, anal retentive narrowness of scope gain him? Nothing. Anyway, it was a narrower window of time, as we said, that investigators wanted to scrutinize. He didn't want to look into Trump's finances after he became president. That would have been the most interesting time probably, but we understand what the limitations were. Didn't matter, though. The bank records offered no evidence that Trump had taken money from Egypt, according to documents reviewed by the Post. In analyzing the records, investigators focused on 2 real estate transactions that brought Trump large sums in the fall of 2016, the document showed. One of those was the refinancing of a Las Vegas property, which the New York Times later pointed to as a possible source of the $10 million infusion to his campaign. I mean, he had to come up with the money first, and knowing he would be reimbursed, yes, that's one thing, but where will he get the cash? Well, a refinancing of a Las Vegas property apparently provided it, or could have provided it. Agents concluded both, though, were irrelevant to the Egypt investigation, according to people briefed on the case. And that could still be related, but irrelevant to the Egypt investigation. Is this where you first raised the $10 million? Yes. Would you ordinarily have refinanced this property? Maybe. Did you do it because you needed $10 million very quickly? Yes. I mean, if honestly answered. Was it because you wanted to inject it into your campaign? Yes. Were you willing to inject it into your campaign even though you could have pocketed the $10 million from the refi because you knew you were going to get the $10 million back from Egypt? Yes. There you go. Is it related? Yes, but would it be okay if we separated it for legal reasons? Sure. Go ahead. Doesn't matter. Separate it all you want. Peter, and why separate it? Well, refinancing your property in Las Vegas isn't illegal. We're not charging you with that. We're just wondering, did you do this legal thing because you knew that you would be able to raise $10 million that you would then have to part with immediately to your campaign, but you were willing to do it because you were going to get reimbursed later? Sure, that is related. The first part of it isn't illegal. The second part of it isn't illegal. The third part of it, where you get paid back, that's illegal. Anyway, Peter Carr, a Justice Department spokesman, I'm sure fired many years ago, declined to comment on behalf of the former special counsel's office. In January of 2018, Mueller's team subpoenaed the National Bank of Egypt. The government was searching for transactions of approximately, let's say $10 million. According to people familiar with the investigation, the demand sparked a secret court battle that would consume Team 10 for the remainder of the Mueller probe. Wow. The attorneys who represented the bank in the subpoena fight did not respond to messages seeking comment. The bank did not respond to detailed questions. The Post pieced together the court fight using records that were later released with redactions, other documents that remained secret, and interviews with people with knowledge of the case. The legal fight, which led to the mysterious closing of a part of the federal courthouse in D.C. in December of that year, wound its way to the Supreme Court. That place again, as each side battled over whether a state-owned foreign bank could be compelled to produce evidence for a domestic U.S. criminal probe. In its final plea to the High Court to hear the case, the bank warned that if it had to turn over records, it would, quote, wreak havoc on American foreign policy, possibly alienating U.S. allies, undermining diplomatic efforts, and inviting reciprocal treatment. The High Court denied the bank's request, but still the bank did not comply. Oh, isn't that odd? By mid-January 2019, the bank had begun accruing contempt fines of $50,000 a day imposed by Beryl Howell. Remember that one? Beryl Howell, chief judge of the U.S. District Court, for failing to turn over the records. By early 2019, February in fact, the bank relented and delivered almost 1,000 pages, including versions of bank documents in Arabic and English. Those bank records contained one especially tantalizing item, a short handwritten letter dated January 15th, 2017. 5 days before inauguration, in which an organization called the Research and Studies Center asked that the bank, quote, kindly withdraw a sum of U.S. dollars, how much in U.S. dollars? $9,998,000 from its Heliopolis branch, located about 7 miles from Cairo International Airport. According to the bank records, employees assembled the money that same day entirely in U.S. $100 bills, put it in 2 large bags, and kept it in the bank manager's office until 2 men associated with the account and 2 others came and took the cash away. Mueller's team, I guess remember that name, in case you ever run into the Research and Studies Center. I guess you're talking to Egyptian intelligence, should that happen to you. Mueller's team gathered prosecutors and agents to brief them on the newly obtained documents. To people in the room, the withdrawal seemed to bolster the classified intelligence and to validate the decision to have had Mueller's team investigate, according to people familiar with the discussions. It wasn't a smoking gun. It wasn't a smoking gun, one of those people said, describing the thinking at the time, but it was very clear that there was so much smoke, and now more smoke, there must be fire. I feel like we just used that analogy. Mueller, meanwhile, had been moving to close down his operation, having nearly completed his probe of alleged Russian interference. By early 2019, he had asked other federal prosecutors' offices to take over his team's unfinished investigations, and they didn't go anywhere either, as it turns out. But they could have, but they, got blocked. The U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C., led by Liu, took on the Egypt probe. Liu was well regarded among the lawyers in her office. She was a Republican who had risen through the ranks of the Justice and Treasury Departments over a decade, but she later ran into headwinds with pro-Trump conservatives who would on 2 occasions successfully oppose her nomination for more senior positions in the government. Nearly 2 years into the job, Liu was being asked to oversee an investigation involving the president who had appointed her. Oh. Important customer is the next section. Liu's office took an aggressive approach at first. Her prosecutors partnered during the handoff with Mueller's team in pressuring the National Bank of Egypt to release records, asking the judge to increase the contempt fine to $300,000 a day. Her prosecutors also pushed the bank to disclose more about the Research and Studies Center. The center had virtually no public profile, and U.S. authorities suspected it was a front for the General Intelligence Service, Egypt's equivalent of the CIA, according to people with knowledge of the case. Prosecutors argued in court that the state-run Egyptian bank must be withholding details about the withdrawal. They said that the bank had not turned over a single email about the enormous same-day transaction and that the lack of any such internal communications was unthinkable. It strains credulity that the bank kept such a stockpile of U.S. dollars on hand, let alone that it was able to gather it all up in less than 24 hours, read a March 21st, 2019 filing signed by Liu. Wonder what Jesse's doing these days, by the way. The bank argued that it had nothing else to produce. The government is beating a dead horse over and over, wrote its U.S.-based attorneys. The two sides also argued over whether the center's address was fake. The bank had reported conducting a site visit of its client in Cairo and finding 55 people working at the address. The U.S. government produced pictures at that address showing an apartment building. In the back and forth arguments in court, the bank on April 4th, 2019, filed a statement from the bank manager confirming the investigators' suspicion that the Research and Studies Center had a, quote, relationship with the Egyptian General Intelligence Agency, according to an English translation of the statement. Further, he wrote, the intelligence agency was, quote, another important customer of the Heliopolis branch. Since seizing the presidency in 2013, Sisi has greatly expanded the powers of the GIS and increasingly relied on the spy agency to maintain his political stronghold at home, as well as to press his agenda abroad. In 2018, his eldest son became the service's deputy director. Top leaders of the GIS figured prominently in the trial that led last month, back in 2024, July, to the conviction of Menendez on charges of accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes and acting as an unregistered agent of the Egyptian government. Amazingly enough, they were able to secure those convictions against the Democrat, but just never worked out against the Republicans. According to people with knowledge of the Trump probe, investigators believe that only Sisi or a government operative acting on his orders could have possibly arranged for the $10 million cash withdrawal. I added a possibly in there to the text, but seemed like applicable subtext. They also saw hallmarks of an international money laundering operation, not one of those, in the way that funds moved into and through the Research and Studies Center accounts ahead of that cash withdrawal, indications of a potential crime that may or may not have been related to an effort to help Trump. Could be any number of crimes that ended up landing $10 million in U.S. currency in their bank account. Didn't necessarily have to go there bound for Trump, just, he seems like a logical target to use a stockpile of U.S. cash for. He loves U.S. cash. Investigators tried to connect the dots before the dramatic withdrawal involving the bags of cash. They noticed that separate transactions in China and Egypt, both in the news today, over a 14-month period suggested a possible path for the $10 million. The Research and Studies Center opened an account at the bank's Heliopolis branch in November of 2015, the bank's records showed. In August of 2016, the center opened a second account, this time in the bank's Shanghai branch. 5 days after that, a company that investigators believed was tied to an Egyptian oligarch, oh no, not one of those, initiated a transfer of $10 million into the center's Shanghai account, records showed. The transfer was held up, then cleared for deposit in Shanghai in December, the records showed. The same amount was transferred from that account to the center's account at the Heliopolis branch shortly before the cash withdrawal there on January 15th, 2017. Now that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? 3 days later, the center closed its account in Shanghai. They were done with it. Within 90 days, its account in Heliopolis was closed too. They were done with it. The Post could not determine whether the Research and Studies Center still exists. A corporate registration number listed in a 2019 bank record does not appear in searches of a government website or on a commercial database of Egyptian businesses. For U.S. authorities in the spring of 2019, that was where the money trail went cold. A new round of investigative steps would be necessary to see whether the money ever appeared on Trump's side of the ledger. Next up, adult supervision. Let's see if we can squeeze out the ending here. In April of 2019, the FBI agents and federal prosecutors proposed a plan to drill deeper. People familiar with the investigation said they eyed a range of investigative targets in Egypt, such as seeking additional bank records and witness interviews. But in the FBI agents' view, the people said there was little reason to take those steps unless they could act on the most important part of their plan, looking at a wider set of Trump's banking records. And that part of the plan proved the most contentious. In a series of meetings beginning in April, FBI agents and supervisors told Liu they supported a proposal to subpoena Trump's banking records. According to contemporaneous notes of the discussions, Liu had concerns about the scope, the notes say. Investigators pressed their case with Liu. They argued that Mueller had not authorized his agents to obtain records later than November of that year. In light of the newly obtained cash withdrawal records from early 2017, the investigators argued that they needed to see what had landed in Trump's accounts after that 2017 Cairo withdrawal, according to notes and people familiar with the case. Naturally, right? Finally, in June, agents seemed to have a breakthrough in a meeting with Liu. According to the notes, senior officials from the FBI's Washington field office told her that bureau leaders supported the effort. You know, who led the bureau? Wray did. Who appointed Wray? Trump did. The full FBI chain briefed up, fully supportive of an investigation, specifically bank subpoena Trump. Those are the notes. Liu indicated she was open to a subpoena, seeking a limited amount of additional Trump bank records. According to the notes and two of the people, the agents were pleased, the people said. As she was leaving, she told the group she would need to run the matter by Barr. Uh-oh. Different sound effect for that one. It was a logical step to take in the Justice Department's standard practice of handling major politically sensitive cases. The Attorney General would have to be briefed on any probe, even tangentially touching a sitting president. But investigators worried Barr might halt the effort in its tracks, two of the people said. That's a valid worry. Just 2 months earlier, Barr had preempted Mueller's investigative report of the Russia probe by issuing a summary, supposedly, declaring that it found insufficient evidence that Trump had engaged in any crime. Barr's move allowed Trump to claim total exoneration, despite Mueller citing substantial evidence that Trump had attempted to block scrutiny of his conduct. Sometime after the June meetings with the FBI, Liu met with Barr to discuss the Egypt case. He urged her to personally review the underlying information from the CIA that had prompted the opening of the criminal investigation 2 years earlier, according to people with knowledge of the discussions. The case was sensitive, Barr told her, and she needed to reach her own conclusions about the merit of further investigative steps. According to people familiar with the discussions, Liu reviewed that intelligence and visited CIA headquarters in Langley to discuss the basis for it. Those people and others said the CIA declined to respond to a detailed list of questions sent by the Post. Afterward, and after conferring with Barr again, Liu expressed hesitancy to FBI agents and her deputies about the proposal to subpoena Trump's bank records. According to people familiar with the case, it felt to some like she had made a 180-degree turn, these people said. Liu was concerned, according to two people familiar with her, thinking that the investigators' push for additional Trump bank records could come off as a fishing expedition. She was not won over by the new records from the 2017 withdrawal, according to these people. Egypt's intelligence agency might make enormous cash withdrawals for any number of reasons, she cautioned, not necessarily to donate to an American president, but thank you for your help with crooked Hillary Clinton. Of course, that hadn't happened yet. Frustrated investigators argued to Liu that in any other case, even with far less compelling evidence, they would have been able to obtain additional bank records in a heartbeat, according to one person who spoke to the Post. Privately, Liu told some supervisors in her office that with Trump having announced his bid for a second term, the focus on a sitting president's finances made this case different. People with knowledge of the matter said, although investigators argued that pursuing bank records would be entirely covert, Liu said she worried the Justice Department could be accused, once again, of interfering in a presidential election. You can't have that, of course. Meanwhile, there was a 4-year interregnum in which none of this got developed, interestingly enough. Some career supervisors briefed on the development sympathized with the challenge Liu faced. She was being asked to take a monumental step of probing a sitting president's financial records in the wake of his claims that the Russia investigation had been based on a hoax. CIA officials had also relayed to Liu concerns that apart from Trump's bank records, other steps investigators wanted to take could jeopardize their operations, according to people familiar with the discussions. As the summer wore on, Barr also met with Wray and some of their top deputies to discuss the Egypt case. Two people with knowledge of the meeting described to the Post. Barr told Wray he had a problem. Liu seemed uncomfortable making key decisions in the case, and Barr said she doubted some of investigators' moves were justified, but felt pressured by agents.
You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
And we'll sum up as quickly as possible. That was when Barr said Liu worried that blocking some of the investigative steps might be perceived by the team as quashing a politically explosive investigation, and so therefore she was in need of adult supervision. We'll have to return to this at some later date, of course. We'll be back tomorrow. Justice Putnam takes the ball now with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Hope I didn't waste your time. See you tomorrow.